So, as we go on, we have a panel discussion now, and the first panel discussion is fast innovation versus low tech, a simple, resilient, and inclusive practice. Balancing high-tech innovation and low-tech resilience is one of the defining challenges of contemporary design. So this discussion explores how simplicity, material intelligence, and biological inspiration can lead to a more inclusive future. So I'd like to invite the panelists to come and sit with me. First of all, we have Sandra Ray, founder of Anima in France and a former founder of Glowy, where she explores bioluminescence as a poetic and practical lighting source for cities. Welcome, Sandra. Next, I would like to invite Stella, Stella Lee Prowse of Aléa. Based in Paris, Stella is an Australian designer investigating mycelium, waste materials, and ephemeral architecture. And Michael, invite you back to the stage. And obviously, Michael continues the conversation around regenerative systems and design intelligence. So, starting with you, Sandra, could you just sort of talk us through about the beginnings, your work, your story, and then, we'll go from there.
Yes, of course, thank you. I'm just sorry about my voice. I'll try to do my best. So my name is Sandra Ray. I'm a designer and bio-inspired entrepreneur for 12 years now. I've spent my first 10 years as creating Glowy, which is a company developing biological lighting using marine bioluminescence bacteria, to make sure that we create a biological lighting system that will basically reduce the light pollution in cities, but also improve well-being. So what we've done with Glowy is that we've cultivated marine bacteria, make sure that it produce light as long as possible, consuming the less nutrients as possible. And basically we created micro aquariums to put into urban furnitures, to make sure that we adapt the need for light to the quality of life that we want to have for the future. So I've did that for 10 years, and after that I had the chance to, and the privilege to to be president of the French National Design Council, where I had to advise the French government on running design policies to make sure that they integrate design as a way to transform our way of living. And more recently, I've created Anima, which is a venture studio dedicated to bio-inspired innovations. Basically, what we do is, like, as a team of entrepreneurs, we invest in both time and cash to make sure that the best researchers and scientists developing biomimetic technologies can go until the product and the market and reach the impact. So we co-found ventures with those researchers. And I've co-funded Aléa, which is the biggest database of biological data. We gather inside that AI platform 680,000 biological data that we translate into design principles. So that's used today for research development and design teams to basically have access to this biological data and the amazing mechanisms that evolution has done in nature, to make sure that when you design a product, you can use it and understand it. And so, yeah, that's basically it.
Okay, thank you. So your work really does involve how you can make urban spaces more human and more alive. So it's something that is going to hopefully have an effect on all of us. Thank you very much, Sandra. And Stella, coming to you, can you just talk us through your journey, your story, and then we'll kind of ask some questions about your work.
Of course. Hi, everyone. So my name is Stella. I'm here on behalf of Aléa, my studio that I founded with Miriam Josie. And I have some visuals to go along with our work, which I can move through pretty quickly. But mostly our work revolves around working with mycelium. For those that don't know, mycelium is the root system of fungi. So it's basically a filamentous network underground that has a relationship to other organisms. and has an essential role in the ecosystem, from decomposing organic matter to storing carbon. And in design, we work with it as a binder. Essentially, it assembles waste materials. You can skip through the slides, pretty. Yeah, so you can see here it's this white filament. And we started our work with these observation studies, so really observing how it interacts with other materials. And then we moved on to working with waste substrates and exploring creating new materials with interesting new material properties. So the substrate is essentially the material. What you feed it determines its kind of like potential applications. It could be anything from textile to toilet paper rolls to paper. Yeah, it could be agricultural waste. But the mycelium is really just the glue, the binder. And so these are just more some kind of our observation studies, observing how it interacts with waste. And these are the bricks I was mentioning, so everything working with like local revalorizing waste streams in our environment. But as we were working with mycelium, we really started to kind of bring up the ethical considerations. We're collaborating with a living material, and it really has agency, and it expresses itself. And we really wondered how we could collaborate in more reciprocal ways instead of in sterile, like isolated environments. Actually embrace like some of its roles in the ecosystem, like the fact that it has a relationship to trees or plants, or can remove toxins from soils. So our main research project is called Back to Dirt, where we quite literally, we thought, can we bring mycelium back into nature and actually use the soil as a mold instead of a plastic mold in a sterile way? And we literally dug a negative form of a chair, because we're product designers, in the ground and inoculated it and grew this chair in 3 weeks. And at the end of its function, we put it back in the ground and it decomposed. And this process we continued and worked, indoors. We grew chairs inside of tanks. We're really interested in kind of the aesthetics and the narratives that come from this kind of process. And also just what it teaches us about kind of embracing the new qualities, new material potential, the unexpected. A lot of these we don't cook, so they grow mushrooms at the end of their life. Not at the end of the life, but like in the process. When we came back to the studio, this one exploded. Really letting the organism express itself and thinking about how we can integrate some of its needs into the process. We're also really interested in working with textiles, how mycelium can transform, digest color. We discovered in an accident, actually leaving an experiment too long, that the mycelium broke down synthetic dyes and actually created patterns by removing color. I think on the next slide after that, you can see that's where the color's been removed. And so, which also has potential for textile recycling. And then we collaborate across different disciplines. So from architecture to fashion, we collaborated with this architecture firm in Milan to make this pavilion that was essentially an experiment to observe how it decomposed over time. So these panels were from Mogu, and we assembled this pavilion, and a year later we came back to find that it had fully decomposed. So also asking, like, what are the potential applications for ephemeral architecture? That's just a little bit about our work, but I think it's, yeah, we can.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. What kind of caught me is when you were sort of saying about collaborating with something that's natural, and then when you showed some of the examples, it's obvious that there is a sense of control to a degree, but then there is also the material or mycelium growing in different ways that were unexpected. How do you see that being sort of applied, maybe on a larger scale or in a sort of urban environment?
Yeah, I think this, what we're really interested in is exploring the limits of control that we have as designers. Yeah. So instead of moving away from this idea of the designer needing to kind of have the mastery over material and know exactly what the outcome is going to be, but actually embrace maybe these unexpected outcomes, and also integrate the unexpected benefits. So thinking about like the fact that the fungi digest the dye, like that is something that we didn't necessarily, it wasn't an intention for us, but I think it took time, and it took actually leaving something too long to see that happen. So I think it's also about kind of acknowledging that innovation takes time.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of pressure now to say biomaterials should replace linear models, and we should be there already somehow and meet the same expectations. But I think what we're trying to do is kind of slow that process down a bit. And see what else emerges.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, isn't it? You've kind of looked at product, you've looked at architecture, you've looked at textiles as well. So there's a kind of lot of scope that you can do and explore. And have you ever kind of revisited anything that you've done a few years ago, or is that the way you're kind of thinking for the future, is to go back to things and see how they've changed?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because in the beginning, I think we were a little bit worried about being pigeonholed into working with mycelium, that it was going to be limiting in some way. Like, we're not going to explore other industries, but it's actually opened up so many, as you mentioned. I think we're always recycling ideas. I think in the studio, like there's nothing really ever new. It's always coming back to something we've already thought about. So often we have ideas and it's just not the right timing. So I think, we often do. I can't think of an exact example right now.
But you have some interesting surprises, I'm sure.
Yes,
yeah.
A lot.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Michael, coming to you, I wanted to ask you a question about biomimetic thinking. Do you think it teaches us about adaptability and longevity in architecture?
Yeah, it can do. It can do. Yeah, in several ways. So in terms of short term, one of the big differences between our buildings and biological organisms is that our buildings aren't very responsive. They just kind of sit there doing the same thing regardless of whether it's blazing sun or a nighttime blizzard. And I think there's scope for getting much more adaptive to respond to those changing weather conditions, so that we can get our buildings to perform better. And then in the longer term, I think there are also things we can learn about conceiving of buildings as having kind of different layers in terms of longevity. So just like our bones are minerals and they last for a long time, whereas our skin and hair are kind of replaced on a much more frequent basis. You can conceive of a building as having some things like the foundations and the walls that might last for centuries, and other things like the finishes that would be replaced more often and need to be made out of materials that are very readily recyclable and ideally are planet positive.
Yeah, because that's something that we suffer from, isn't it? That we like the new, we like to replace, and we like to kind of make our mark and say, oh, this is a different era, this is a different style. So,
yes.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't be so damaging if the materials we were using were net positive.
Yeah. So we kind of need to learn something about how we can make buildings last longer. If you look at Victorian houses, they've lasted for hundreds of years, and it's sort of embarrassing that we can't produce the same sort of quality at the moment. Sandra, I want to come back to you and ask you about scale in terms of biotechnologies. How do you think we can kind of use biotechnologies to kind of scale things?
Well, this is, of course, the hard part, because I think science offers a lot of possibilities. And the thing is to find the right timing, you've mentioned it, to make sure that the solution that we are offering can scale, and can scale because of the people being ready to change. Also, the first challenge is, of course, the mindsets. If we look at what I've done with bioluminescence, if we had imagined to replace just bulbs, it just wouldn't have worked. The goal behind it was really to think, how can we integrate this biological living light differently and change the way we used to light, change also the intensities that we don't need that we use today in urban landscape. So the first goal is really about how to readapt our usage with the discoveries and technologies that we have to prepare the scaling phase. And the second part is, of course, as a venture studio, my job is to make sure that the supply chains are ready, that the project really transform into companies, making sure that you don't just mature into the technological part or the product part, but also on the business part, finding the right business model, building the right multidisciplinary team, having the right impact roadmap, making sure that you can fund and finance the development, because as you mentioned, this is a long process. Changing and developing a disruptive technology, and mainly in biomimicry, it's like from 7 to 10 years from the lab to the inspiration from the biological model to the market, and that needs funding, patient capital, and the right people on board to make sure that on the way you don't lose anything, either vision, ambition, or impact. So I think that it is more a question of collaboration between different profiles, visionaries, designers, scientists working together with business people. And I know that it's not something that we like to think about as designers, but I do really think about the fact that these collaborations between the finance, business, and creative world is key to be able to really have transformative innovation happening.
Yeah, and do you feel that there needs to be a kind of learning from people who may be in business, understanding more about what design can do, so that they feel that there is some return, because they might think, oh, it's only going to be worthwhile if there's a return on their investment? I mean, how do you go about finding the right collaborators and the right partners for the work?
Well, I think it's the design and biomimicry fields have the same challenges, making sure that people see the long-term vision, but also access the skills and the competencies. And that's also what we've created as Aléa, because as designers, as engineers, as researchers, we are not biologists, so we don't have access to this precious data and don't have the possibility to basically translate it from biological principles to actually physical, chemical principles that will be able to apply in our designs. So I think that we're missing also translators between nature can offer and our ability to actually co-develop a product. And you were talking about how to find the best collaborations. I think the venture studio model is, of course, a way of doing that. It's basically sharing the risks, sharing the adventure, to make sure that you mix people. But I think the most important thing is make sure that and I'm saying it because I am a designer, and I founded my first company as a designer, and it could be the same if the company is founded by an engineer or any kind of profile. You don't know everything, and it's okay. And sometimes we tend to look at the project that we're running from our lens and tend to think that, for example, if we have prototype or pilot scale project, we've done basically 17% of the way. But the thing is, if you have missed the financial roadmap, the business model roadmap, then you have done only 5% of the way. So just make sure that you know what you do and what you don't know how to do to find the best collaborators.
Yeah, and I think a key thing that you said, I picked up on, is like sharing the risk. So as you say, you won't know all the answers, but actually if people are going to come on the same journey as you, they need to know that, as you say, it's a long-term thing, and that they will all benefit from it, but need to kind of have the same mindset. I suppose it's about being on the same page, isn't it, really? Yeah. Thank you, Sandra. Stella, I want to come to you to ask you a little bit more about low tech, living materials. How do you feel that they inspire inclusive and circular design approaches? I mean, you've mentioned it a little bit in what you were saying.
Yeah. I think in a big way, they bring us back to our local environment, because, I mean, I can speak mostly for microfabrication, like using the process of working with mycelium, but I think it relates to biomaterials in general. But often where you're working with local waste streams. You can work with local fungi. You are really like, you don't have to bring in materials from far away at all. So I think it really teaches us to think locally, to value waste as a resource. I mean, one of the best benefits of collaborating with fungi is that they consider our waste food, or any kind of dead organic matter. Yeah, and I think there's also this element of embracing the unexpected. I think reframing limitations as opportunities, where I think that's where it gets exciting for me versus like saying, oh, well, it's not there yet. Yeah.
So it's about a mindset, isn't it? Having a positive outlook and
I think so. Yeah, and I think that also comes with, not having the pressure necessarily to, I mean, we have found some applications for our research, but for the most part, we've kept it, been lucky to be supported in grants or through other areas in our practice, but we're very much like trying to stay in kind of research for now. And yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to that sort of finance idea, when you say grants, is that something that's readily available, or is that something you kind of have to really fight for?
I think you have to fight for it. Yeah. I mean, we've been lucky that we've received like some generous grants, but we've worked for it, and it's definitely work. Yeah.
I also want to say, if there are any questions from the audience, please feel free to put your hand up, and we can integrate that into the conversation as well. Okay, thank you. Michael, again, want to sort of kind of bring you into this conversation as well. What do you feel that are the most sort of critical changes needed to shift from sustainability to regeneration?
Well, that's a big question, and that's fine. I like big questions. That's fine. So I mentioned some of them, which is rethinking our role as humans and aligning everything we do as life. I also think we need to redefine commerce as something that is a longer-term venture with a wider group of stakeholders. And if I were to kind of dial up the ambition even more, but I genuinely believe this, I think we need an epochal shift, actually. Because we really haven't made enough progress at all over the last 30 years. And so that's something that I've been reading a lot about recently. How have epochal shifts happened in the past? And it seems that generally they occur when enough people lose faith in the kind of narratives that they've been encouraged to believe, and they become sufficiently convinced by the emerging ideas of the new epoch. And I think in many ways we're at a similar place now. Very few people believe that sustainability based on just trying to be a bit less bad is going to get us there. Few people believe that conscious consumerism alone is going to be enough to save the planet. I think there are very few people, apart from politicians and conventional economists, who think that endless growth is possible or even desirable. And at the same time, the kind of new mindsets are emerging and multiplying. So ideas of, planetary health and planetary limits, ecological economics like donut economics. I think the shift from sustainable to regenerative is part of that as well. And perhaps most importantly, I think we need to see a transformation in our ideas of agency, our perceived capacity to influence the future. And so in a previous book, a co-authored book I wrote called Flourish, the first chapter was about this idea of possibilism. So possibilism is neither optimistic or pessimistic, because both of those imply that the future is something that happens to you and you either feel positive or negative about it. Being a possibilist is about deciding on the future that you want and then collaborating with others to make that future possible.
Interesting idea, but how do you, I mean, from what you were saying, it sounds like we need a reset in a very sort of layman's terms. How do you feel that we can go about that if there's a movement that's going on amongst, say, creative designers, people that care about the planet, but there's not going on politically? How do you feel that we can kind of make that connection?
Yeah, that's another tough question. It's fine. I'll do my best. So, I think there are kind of different levels to this. So within our design work, we can do what the great systems thinker Donella Meadows suggested about when she was asked, how do you change paradigms? She said, well, you keep pointing to the flaws and anomalies in the existing paradigm, and you speak loudly and with assurance from the new paradigm. So we can do that as designers. But then in terms of kind of maximizing our agency, I also think we need to kind of build coalitions. So that was part of the thinking behind something that I helped initiate called Architects Declare a Climate and Biodiversity Emergency.
Yes, I've heard of that. Yeah.
So that was trying to use the collective influence of over 1,000 signatories to bring about the kind of changes that are very difficult to do at the scale of an individual project or individual company. And I think there's scope for other companies to do the same. So, yeah, sometimes I want to scream when I hear fossil fuel executives saying, well, there's not much we can do. We have to operate within a commercial environment. And that's just nonsense, gutless nonsense. They have more than enough influence to get together with their competitors and say, all right, well, these are the changes we need government to implement so that we can still operate competitively, but we can do it within the constraints of the planet. Otherwise, it's going to be game over for humanity.
Yeah, and with this Architects Declare, is that something that is just a UK-based organisation, or is it something that's more global?
It started in the UK, and we deliberately set it up to make it as easy as possible for other groups to do their own version.
Right.
So it now exists in 28 different countries, and there are over 8,000 companies signed up to a declaration of action.
That's fantastic. And do you feel that it has made an influence, a change already?
I do. I mean, it'd be quite difficult to measure.
Yeah.
But just in the time in the last sort of 6 years, so we set it up in 2019. In that time, there's been a huge increase in the discussion about regenerative design. And I'm not saying that was all due to Architects Declare at all, but I think it'd be fair to claim some of that, because the whole thing was based on encouraging this shift from sustainable to regenerative.
Yeah, well, it sounds like everyone here should be aware of it as well. I think it's something to get on board with, especially it's grown and become, as you say, in 28 nations.
There is a French version of Architects Declare.
Okay, we need to kind of spread the word. I want to kind of ask all of you, actually, if you've got something to kind of put into. Thank you very much, Michael, about innovation and how. And I mean, you have kind of touched on it already, but how can innovation empower rather than exclude communities? Because obviously it's very much about people, whatever we do, design, innovation, getting things changed, making progress. And it's about trying to include people. So I just wanted to get some ideas or your thoughts on, communities and how that can, make something work.
I think from our experience, it's really been very uplifting and empowering to feel a part of a community, and we're part of this kind of international network of people working with biomaterials, and a lot of what motivates us is just the sharing. Like, we really share everything we do, and our peers do too. And whether it's like experiments, discoveries, failures, and we're designers, but we're connected to scientists, to mycologists, to artists, and it is kind of, for us, all about that, but also, I think, demystifying the process. I think sometimes, especially I think around working with in microfabrication, there's this idea that you need certain kinds of equipment or fancy laboratory or If you look on YouTube, it'll tell you a bunch of stuff that you need to start working with it, and I think that's just not true. It's much more low tech, and I think sometimes we fancify the process to make it sound like less accessible. So I think we're really interested too in just communicating how low tech it is and how easy the process is. So yeah, I think sharing and demystifying and just being transparent, but in our little bubble, that for us I think keeps it inclusive.
And do you want to contribute as well, Sandra?
Yeah, what I would add is that what's very interesting about this biomimicry approach is that the storytelling that you can have, it's so powerful. And this is something that, of course, is easier to involve people and communities towards a shared vision and on a desirable future. So I think we really have a chance here, getting inspired from nature to create new visions for tomorrow, and bring everybody in that collective journey. This is just beautiful stories. A few examples where, if you look at how the wing of the butterfly is structured, it basically is structures that creates a blue color with a pigment, and this is the creation of an amazing startup that's creating this nanostructure with cellulose, being able to create this pigment, the blue color and all the colors with that pigment. So the story behind the innovations are really interested, and on top of what you say about innovation, I think that we also need to think innovation not just as a technical innovations. You have technical innovations, but you also have usage innovations. And I think this is also what basically gathers people around how to change the way we behave. This is also innovation, it's not just about technology.
Yeah, I think that's really important, actually. It sounds like it's about education, including people. I mean, obviously, I work in education, and I'm very aware that what we are trying to sort of deliver for the students that come to the Royal College is giving them sort of different ways of approaching things, so that they, as you know, we've all touched on that what has happened isn't really working anymore, and it needs to be different ways of approaching perhaps something that has been a problem for some time. Is there anybody in the audience who has a particular... Oh, yes, there is. There's two. Okay. I'll bring the mic over, and it'll be a lot easier. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I have two questions. Maybe one for Michael. So the biggest challenge I see is like, so when customers are coming to you, I mean, I'm talking about the promoters, right? So when they talk about sustainability and all this stuff, but they have these three big questions they have, right? I don't want to lose any of the functionality. Can this be done in a little more fast-paced, cost-effective, right? Because for me, the biggest success story in sustainable architecture is from a British architect called Laurie Baker, who was able to make the influence and make affordable housing and affordable big hospitals and libraries, right? Which still today is being practiced in down south India, right? So how do you try to object these kind of questions when these promoters come and say, I love your concept, but I still want you to fit into these different parameters.
Yeah, so it can be difficult if a client asks you to do something and then sets very tight constraints. And I tend to try and cut straight to the chase and see if they're really willing to demonstrate leadership. And if they're not, then I'd rather devote my energy to a client that does. And I think leadership does involve rethinking some of those assumptions. And one of those assumptions, I think, in what you were saying, is that they want to maintain the kind of current economic system and maintain short-term profitability. But we need to be asking, well, who are the losers in that scenario? It's other species and it's future generations, frankly. And so I always try to lead clients on a kind of transformation journey. And at the start of a project, now I always recommend going through a series of workshops that are transformative in their thinking. And one of these is a workshop that's very effective at promoting long-term thinking. It's a kind of meditation exercise based on Joanna Macy's work. And it encourages people to think over a much longer term and also to think about what legacy they want to create. And if you then combine that with a description of the distinction between sustainable and regenerative, and sustainable essentially means degenerative, is making things worse, either fast or slowly. And I think there are very few people who would actually want their legacy to be degenerative. So I have found these workshops very useful as a way of kind of elevating the general level of ambition within a client group or sometimes within a whole project team. And then you need to try and get that locked in to the brief so that it stays as part of the project all the way through. So I've slightly challenged your question, but I hope that answer is useful.
Thank you, Michael. And I think we had a question over here.
Hi, my question is also for Michael. You mentioned that concrete is responsible for 8% of the CO2. And you also mentioned, which we've heard that a lot, but we also mentioned that the structure is very important because it's the thing that lasts for 200, 300, 400 years. So first of all, first question is, do you think then that that 8% is fair because of the life of concrete? And secondly, can we give concrete a break? Because I'm from Canada, an architect there. Everybody and his mother now wants to do a timber building. And do we have enough wood if every building today was out of timber?
If either of you want to comment on that as well, please do.
I just want to share, but afterwards, just 2 examples of bio-inspired innovation answering the structure and the cement. So
okay. All right, sure. So I accept part of your point that it's not as straightforward as just saying, okay, we need to shift it from concrete to timber because we won't have enough timber. And one of the projects I'm working on at the moment is a timber panel that combines very thin sheets of timber with mycelium insulation so that we can make timber buildings, but with a fraction of the amount of timber. Because yes, if all buildings shift towards mass timber, we don't have enough timber. Concrete, give it a break. Well, I'd rather give it a boost in terms of innovation. And if I was at a governmental level, I'd want to be providing incentives for anyone that is innovating in biomineralization and geomineralization. And it is perfectly conceivable that we could get to the point where every ton of concrete poured takes carbon out of the atmosphere. And then, that really would be a breakthrough. Over to you, Sandra.
Yeah, just to share 2 projects. The first one is about, we were talking about the structures and the alveolar and lattice things that we can find in nature. And one of the problem today, the limits of it deploying is that you can do it perfectly with 3D printing, but 3D printing is hard to do at large scale and industrial scale. And so we have this amazing startup in France that's called Modulatio, and they're basically creating a way to do a mold with structures with lattice and alveolar structures that are variables inside. So you can have at some point on the same material for metals and cement the big alveoles and another part the smaller lattice structures. So and they've been developing amazing prototypes on different materials, and this is completely changing the game into what we can do in terms of architecture, but also in any designs of products. And the other one is it's called Minialit. It's they're making the way bones form at room temperature, and they're basically mixing mineral powders that could be waste from any kind of minerals. It could be, for example, sand, desert sand, and water from the sea. They mix it with something that accelerates a reaction at room temperature, and that actually creates something that is hard like stone. With a really simple process that do the demonstration with just something that it's mixing just as you're cooking something, and that creates something that is way much more stronger than cement with just minerals and at room temperature.
Thank you for your responses, and it sounds like it's about communication and innovation and new kind of ideas, again, exploring. I think you have another question over here, though.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, hi, Sandra. So what exactly do you look for before you want to invest or collaborate with the entrepreneurs here, right? Because one big challenge with designers, the creative guys, including me, I think we all are pretty bad when it comes to creating a business model, a revenue model, right? So because we don't chase numbers, and everybody says that you have to start with the BMC, the business model canvas, your balance sheets. End of the day, if that doesn't work, I mean, everything goes for, because they just fall in love with their passion of ideas and stuff. So what exactly do you look for when somebody comes to you and approaches? Thank you.
Well, we look for someone that have a vision and that understood just what you said, and that basically needs us to be able to do this business development, business modeling job. So we work already with design studios developing biomaterials, for example. So they've created these amazing biomaterials, and they basically trying to see if it can go at scale. And so what we do is that we really are the team that will be the missing skills in the design studios to make sure that we have identified that there is a supply chain that can exist and can go at scale, that we know where to start in terms of market, because usually, and mainly in biomaterials and materials in general, but it's kind of platform technology, so you can go in a lot of different markets. So our job is also to identify which market should we start with, where is the best model. So we're basically looking for visionaries that want to go into entrepreneurship, but we will basically be the team and finance the team to have the skills around the creator. And we basically fund that part of the journey to make sure that the thing goes from a project to a company, being sure that then we can secure funding and going to investors and managing those funding journeys, making sure that the conditions of success are reunited for the project.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions? Oh, yes.
Thank you for a very interesting panel. I have a question. What would be your top 3 materials to go with, for instance, for furniture or for building design?
Mycelium, no.
That's one. We need another 2.
No, I actually wouldn't say mycelium. I think, I don't know if I have a top 3. It's like, I think part of the problem too is when we put materials on a pedestal and we say like, this is gonna be the material that solves all of our problems and it's gonna be the answer to everything. So it depends, like it depends on the context, the locality, the time scale. I think, I mean, materials that are emerging that I'm excited about at the moment, I'm really interested in algae and algae-based materials. I think there's a lot of really interesting biomaterials obviously emerging. Of course, yeah, I'm interested in mycelium, but it's also very frustrating and it's limiting. There's limitations of it, but also a lot of potential. But I don't know. What about you two? Do you have?
Yeah, well, I've mentioned one with this like room temperature produced stone. There's another one that I like, but first I totally align with what you're saying. There's not one thing that's gonna save the all challenges, and we in innovation we really have to take care of what innovations to go where, and we shouldn't talk about having miracle solutions for sure. And we tend to do that in the media, and we really tend to do that, and it's important to not do that. But in terms of architecture, I have another one that's called Voodoo, and it's an augmented wood. So and they've just done their first facade on a building in Lausanne, in Switzerland. It's basically a technology that takes like cheap wood, and that they take out a component, and I think it's a lignin, and put a bioresin onto it. And at the end of it, you have a wood that is fire resistant, and that is 10 times stronger than steel, which is just amazing. They've been doing that for 10 years now, and as I mentioned, just installed the first facade in Lausanne. They've been having huge contracts with Bouygues and people like that in the last month. So just go look at it. It's really amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, so part of me wants to challenge your question, because I think there are kind of bigger issues that we should be talking about, like, what kind of buildings do we want at the center of our cities? Because what we put at the center of our cities says a lot about our values. In a traditional age, it would have been the cathedral or a church, which suggests that religion was the most important thing. In modern cities is often the shopping mall, which suggests that consumerism is the most important thing. I think there's an interesting question now about what should be at the center of a regenerative city. And for me, that is some kind of space or building that allows people to come together for large-scale shared experiences. But anyway, now coming on to your question a bit more specifically, materials. I have been exploring ways of making materials and buildings out of atmospheric carbon, because I think that is one of the kind of big challenges and opportunities. And there are some obvious ones, like wood and other biomaterials. And I think that biopolymers that are fully recyclable, that you can use in 3D printing, are very promising, because 3D printing allows us to get much closer to the way that structures and materials are assembled in nature with much more efficiency. And I do think that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk that in many ways cultural changes are more important than technological issues. And that's because the outcome of any particular technology is often very dependent on the mindset behind it. So for instance, 3D printing, within a mindset of conventional sustainability, that could easily see us just drowning in millions of tons of short-life consumerist rubbish. But within a regenerative mindset, it could be transformative, because it could allow us to use exactly the right materials and to assemble them in incredibly ingenious and efficient ways, and to do so in a way that allows near perfect recyclability. So that's why I think it's important that we talk about shifting mindsets more than kind of technologies or material choices.
Thank you, all of you, for your responses to that question. Are there any other questions from the audience? Can't see any hands up. I think actually what you were saying, Michael, about sort of retail spaces being what we kind of used to have in the centre of cities, and now that's changing. And it's a shame I haven't got an example of it, but in Canary Wharf in London, what used to be a much lauded financial centre, there's lots of companies that have moved out, and what they've done is they've created almost community spaces where people can entertain themselves. They can go and be on the water, and it's absolutely changed the whole character of that area. And yet they still have the buildings as buildings because they're built to last a long time. But the kind of vibe and the culture has changed because of the people that occupy it. So that's an interesting exercise. And I only recently heard that here in Paris that the Champs-Élysées has been pedestrianised, which I think is incredible. And I can't wait to see that, because that's something we want to do in London, is to change the way people spend their time and actually, explore a centre of a city. So has anybody here been to the pedestrianised area of Champs-Élysées, and how would you actually think about it? Is it something that's a good thing for Paris? Great thing, right? Yeah. And how long ago was that? How long ago was that done? Is that like this year or last year? Okay. Yeah. So it's something that I want to explore, and it's obviously the government, mayor here or whatever, whoever is in charge of it, thinks that we need to change the way that we connect with each other and use space, and that is going to sort of mean that there is some sort of reset in the buildings that we have.
I think it was quite recent,
right?
No? But I think also if you go to the Seine, and you can walk along the Seine now, but this used to be a road, and a busy road, and I think it was 2014 when Anne Hidalgo changed that, and now it's a walkway. But I think we can take that for granted, or just assume that it was always that way. But it's so important to have this access to water in a city
nature.
and nature, and it really changes your experience. So I think it's incredibly important. We can very quickly get used to it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's already happening, and people are sort of embracing it. Okay, I think. Oh, no more questions. I think we have gone to a natural break. So I'd like to thank the panel for their contribution and discussion. So I'd like you to just have quick round of applause to say thank you very much to Stella, Sandra, and Michael. And we'll have a break, and then we'll come back for the next presentation and panel discussion. So thank you very much.